Every Thursday at 5 o'clock New York City time, we review people's photos. And we've reviewed thousands of people's photos, but there's one change we find ourselves making over and over again, and it's a really easy one. It's adjusting the black and white points. This is the number one tip we want to provide to people who are just briefly editing their photos. It takes only a second. Let's jump into Lightroom. I have some photos from a recent photo shoot we did at a Sony event. The histogram. This is up here. And if you use Lightroom or another app, they'll all have some kind of histogram. You want to make sure that some part of the histogram is touching the left side and some part is touching the right side. And there are exceptions to this rule. I'm totally aware. But for the most part, even if it's a dark picture, a night photo, or a bright daytime picture, you should have something black and something white. Let's take a look at this photo here. You can see it's overall, it's a club type shot, so it should be dark. And indeed, if you look at the histogram, almost everything's over to the left, so it is mostly dark. However, I'm going to grab the white slider here, and if I hold down the Alt key, Lightroom will show me highlight all the parts of the photo that are completely white. And you can see there really aren't any white points. So if I drag it to the white, I just want to drag it until at least some parts of the picture are completely, purely white. And that just ensures that I have as much contrast as I can in the photo. If you don't have a black point and you don't have a white point, then your picture is at least a little bit washed out, and it might look okay on your screen, but it will look better on other people's screens, and it will certainly look better if you go to make a print from it. So I hit the Y key to show the before and after, and you can see by bringing that white point up, it definitely added some contrast and some pop to the photo. Let's go on to the next photo here. This is a basketball scene, and looking at the histogram, you can see it's just flat out underexposed. All the information is over here in the left half of the histogram. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of raise the exposure up until my subjects are properly exposed. I want them at least in the midtones, if not the right third of the histogram. But I'm also going to grab this white slider here and hold down the Alt key and drag it to the right until some notable part of the picture is actually fully white. What this does is it gives our brain a key point where when we look at the photo, we'll know that there's some super bright part of the picture. All the contrast is defined between pure white and pure black. We have a good video on this. If you search our channel for dynamic range, I go into great detail about how this works. But for now, just grab that white slider, hold down the Alt key, and drag it up until something turns white. A little bit of an area is okay. The detail up here isn't important. You can do that for the blacks too. Grab the black slider, hold down the Alt key, and then drag it to the left until some portion of your picture is black. And so now we can see we might have lost a tiny bit of detail in his shorts, but that's okay because it's the overall contrast that's far more important. And again, you want to use the exposure slider here to adjust the overall brightness of the image and then go back and adjust the black and white levels. Moving on to the next photo. This picture, the theme is it's kind of taken in a hotel room and maybe a couple of people have robbed a bank or pulled off some kind of caper. So it should be a bit of a low-key picture. It should be a little bit dark because it's sunlight streaming in, supposedly. So let's make it a dark picture, a low-key picture. Let's drag the exposure slider to the left. Even though it's going to be a low-key picture, I still want some sort of white point in it. So I'm going to grab that white slider, hold down the Alt key, and then drag it to the white until something turns white. Did I say drag it to the white? Drag it to the right. So you can see it's still overall a dark picture. I can even lower the exposure a little bit more. And again, make sure I have something white in the picture. As I look at the before and after, you can see even though this actually has more white than the before, it's actually feels like a darker picture because I lowered the overall exposure, but still retained that white point to keep plenty of contrast. It's more of a low-key photo now. You can tell from the histogram, moodier. Watch shows like Game of Thrones or any TV show. When there are scenes happening at night, the scene will overall be very dark, but there will always be a bright point of light. It could be a candle or a street light or a light in the room. Almost every scene will have a completely white point. And even in bright daylight scenes, there will almost always be something that's completely black because filmmakers know these tricks. Take a look at another picture, and this one actually has a light in the scene. So we want to grab the white slider, hold down the Alt key, and make sure it's white. So it is indeed white. And you don't have to worry about retaining detail in that. There's no detail to be had. The overall contrast of the scene is far more important. And you can see her face is actually pretty dark. So that's the most important part of the frame. We'll want to make it nice and bright, just assuming we're not trying to get a particular mood. And now I'm going to actually dial that back. And now I'm going to grab the black slider and just make sure there's a black point in this picture. And as I hold down the Alt key, there is no black point. So I'm dragging it more to the left until I see some blacks creeping in. There we go. We have some blacks in here. And looking at the before and after, you can see the before picture was okay, but the after picture, just by adjusting the contrast in the blacks and the whites, has far more contrast and pop while still seeming completely natural. This next picture definitely should be a low-key picture, and indeed it is. There's plenty of blacks in here, and we already have a good white point and a good black point. Well, actually there's not many blacks, but I will add a little bit of black in. But let's say we want to actually make it feel low-key. I'm going to lower the overall exposure of it so most of the picture is black. And now I'm still going to go back and make sure we have some whites and some blacks in here. So you can see overall a darker picture, but still retains whites and blacks. This is particularly important with night photos where your camera tends to underexpose it. You might not have any white point. In night photos, especially pictures of cities with streetlights or stars, make sure there are bright white points. You have to look at the histogram. Don't trust your eyes. It's important when you're shooting the picture too to look at the histogram after you take the picture and make sure that some part of the frame is touching just the right side of the histogram. If it's not, add exposure compensation and shoot again. Be sure to shoot raw because the raw file will allow you to recover a little bit of blown out highlight. So if it is touching the right side a little bit, you don't have to worry about lost detail. You can always recover it from the raw file. This picture of Chelsea was exposed by the auto exposure system. And as you can see, the right side of the histogram here is missing some information. Now, if I'd done everything perfectly, I would have looked at the histogram and reshot, but it was an event and I didn't have that sort of time. Nonetheless, I can now grab the white slider, hold down the Alt key, and drag it to the right until I'm clipping some whites. There we go. Now, I'm losing a little bit of detail in those highlighted areas, but that's okay, because who cares? They're not important. It's not her face. Her face might be a little bit bright now, so in that case, I can just grab the exposure slider and drag it down a little, or I could drag the highlight slider down a little bit to make sure I don't overexpose her face. Nonetheless, I'm still going to need to retain some whites, and I'll check the blacks here too. I can pull out a few more of the blacks, make sure just the deepest shadows in her hair are black. At this point, you might say, well, the blacks in her hair are being crushed. The blacks in her coat here are missing a little bit. You can always raise the shadows up and bring out a little more of that detail if you want, but still, you still need to make sure you retain some part black in the photo. I hope this has helped. Just wanted to give a tip because we end up repeating this on our live show over and over again. Always have a little bit of black, always have a little bit of white. Yes, there are exceptions, but as long as you make the decision deliberately to not include white or black, I'm fine with it. I just don't want to see it happen accidentally anymore. Thanks. See you at 5 on Thursdays. Bye.